As many of you know, I am in the very fortunate position that I do this for a living. I do overland travel for a living. I build vehicles and share my ideas, share my experiences, and I do it for a living. And one of the questions that is asked of me probably more often than any other question is, if money was no object, what would you drive? Established in 1996, Forex Overland is the world's first global overland expedition channel. Join us as we explore the world by four-wheel drive. I did a live show with my mate Paul Rogers, Buck Rogers. Has a YouTube channel based out of Queensland, and I did a live show with him, and he asked me this very question. And I said to him, I'd build exactly what I got here, but I'd have one in Africa and one in maybe the Middle East and one in the United States, and etc., etc. Because I love this, it's fantastic, I love it to bits. But is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. So I think the better way of phrasing that question is, if you could build absolutely anything, what would you build? Given that money was no object. And being on an actual trip right now on the Canning Stock route, what would I love to drive? Well, it's not a Unimog. It's not a really large vehicle. And the reason why I say that is that maybe it's a different video altogether why I wouldn't drive a Unimog, but let me just briefly say that what we have done in the last 3 days, you could not do it in a Unimog. It's been incredibly overgrown, and we could not have stuck to the tracks. We would have had to drive outside the tracks, and it would have been an incredibly difficult thing to do in a Mog. It's just too big. So the advantage of a Unimog is its live-in ability and its amazing off-road ability. But its off-road ability here, it's met its match. It's too big. It couldn't do this. Yesterday, the bushes, that was ridiculous. Probably the closest and most challenging in terms of just pushing through undergrowth that I've ever experienced. Certainly right up there amongst the most difficult that I've ever experienced. Mog is too big. You can't do it. And the wheels, because your track is so much wider than the track on, these tracks are made by Nissan Patrols and Toyota Land Cruisers and Hiluxes and etc. That's the width. So you're now driving outside them. The tires are now running along the edge. Punctures. You're inviting punctures, and they do get a lot more punctures. And of course, with such a big vehicle, changing a wheel, repairing a puncture, is 10 times the effort that it would be with a smaller vehicle. So my answer is, I want to stay reasonably compact for that reason. Because yes, I don't have the off-road ability of a Mog. When a Mog gets stuck, and they do get stuck in mud, they can get stuck. Yes, it can go far further than this in mud. If we might in the roads in a couple of days ahead hit mud. I'm hoping we don't. But where the Mog would drive straight through with no problems at all, we might have to winch, etc., with standard sized vehicles like Land Cruisers and Patrols and things. When they get stuck, man, have you got a problem? Because an ordinary four-wheel drive can't actually pull you out, because the portal axles. What about portal axles? Aren't portal axles fantastic? Yes, they give you massive amounts of extra clearance. Fantastic. Clearance is good. Yes, I don't deny clearance is good, but when you're stuck, you are stuck. So now you've got a very heavy vehicle like a Unimog, portal axles, you've buried it. You need a bulldozer to pull you out. Ordinary four-wheel drives cannot do the job. They're just not heavy enough. So, I don't think I want a vehicle that is so big that operating it and driving it becomes a challenge. For the perceived gain of, oh, I can go anywhere because my off-road ability is fantastic. Yes, it is. But when you get stuck, oh heavens. So you've got, you know, here we've got an insurance policy. We've got an insurance policy in that if I get stuck, well, my mates can pull me out. If I had a Mog, if I get stuck, are they going to be able to pull me out? So that off-road ability is a double-edged sword. For the main advantage of fantastic live-out, because the payload, I can have fantastic range if I want to. I can stay out in the bush for a really long time if I want to because I've got the payload. So that, yes, I agree. It has massive versatility because it can carry so much and is so nice to live out of. The other part about that is so nice to live out of. Most of the things are in the back. So remember, you've got to walk upstairs. It's very high to get inside and walk downstairs, and everything is inside. So it's very much a live-in vehicle. This is very much a live-in, live-out. Mostly live-out. Fantastic for Africa, Australia, etc., where the weather is fairer. The living out is very appealing. And some countries where you're going to be doing most of your living in, then fine. So it's a balancing act. I don't think most Mogs with, camping, overlanding configurations on the back are mostly live in, not live out. And so you're in and out, and up a staircase because it's so high. So, all right, there you are. Let's go back. So what would I have? It's not a Mog. It's not the size of a Mog. It's not any vehicle the size of a Mog. I like this size. And what would I do if I had the ultimate? If I said, okay, what would I do? I'll tell you what I will do. I would take a troop carrier, probably with a V8 engine. All right. I would stretch it. I would make its wheelbase probably the same as the 79. So I'm taking basically the 79 platform, troop carrier body. But now extending it is a challenge because you've got to extend the body, and that's complicated. The moment you extending a chassis is far less complicated than extending a body. But extending the chassis is not difficult to do, and there are many companies in Australia that do an extremely good job extending the chassis of a 70 series Land Cruiser. Let me interrupt myself. I can hear you cry, why a Troopy? Why another Troopy? Why another Troopy? I'll tell you why. It's a van, and a van means that you can adapt it in ways that you cannot do with a station wagon, or it's extremely difficult to do with a station wagon. The fact that it is a van makes all of the difference, and those issues with the troop carrier, yes, there are many that have to be addressed. The narrower back axle. What about other modifications to the troop carrier to make it even better? Yes, I would consider those as well, because remember, we're talking about if cost wasn't an issue, what would I do? So imagine a troop carrier extended by one window, one of the windows that are behind me side, extended by about that. It's probably about 400, my guess, 400 mil extension on the chassis and the body. So now you've got a much longer piece of real estate in the back to build a live-in, live-out. I would then put in more accessible things on the outside. So these gull windows from Explore Glazing in Holland, they're wonderful, beautiful quality. I'd have more of those. I would make use of those, but I'd also add in cutouts. If you're going to extend the body, well, then you can cut up the body and do stuff. I would have more, maybe drawers or something like this. I'm going to get out, excuse me, and move this bush. Where was I? Yes, improve accessibility from the outside, because if you're cutting up the body, then that's easier to do. There's a Australian company doing coil spring conversions and axle coil spring solid axles, and I would definitely use a coil spring conversion on the back. So now I've got a long wheelbase troop carrier with this V8, which I'd need to uprate a little bit because I'm talking about a heavier vehicle, and I would definitely run larger wheels, at least 35s on it. I think that's what I would build. And I know some of you are saying, oh, so 79, you know, all these Land Cruiser. Okay, all right, fair enough. I get what you're saying. You know, oh, not another Land Cruiser build. I get what you're saying. But what else is there? What else is there? Could I do the same with another vehicle? Remember, the troop carrier is a van, which makes this adaptation possible. Far more complicated with a four-door wagon. Far more complicated. If not, I wouldn't say impossible, but the point is that from here I can use the space right from behind this seat all the way to the back. It would be a two-seater, which means I only need two doors. So I still think I would base it on a troop carrier. I love the idea of taking a different vehicle to a troop carrier and trying a similar one. Maybe with a vehicle that's already got coil springs. Okay, great. What? What is there? Solid axles? I want solid axles. Ineos Grenadier. What else? Nothing. There is nothing. What else? Jeep. Yeah, I could, maybe. Not in love with a Jeep platform. I'm going to interrupt that monologue. I was in my vehicle and I was loving it. I was loving the fact that it was compact. I was loving the fact that I had the strength of the solid axles. I love the confidence a solid axle provides. And it's better in so many ways. I know that. But what I wasn't enjoying about the troop carrier was its ride. You know, if you look at suspension systems and what is the best combination? Well, actually the best combination is the Range Rover that was on the trip with us. It was coil springs, solid axles, and the ride was fabulous. Even that vehicle, it's so old. The ride over the ruts and through the, brilliant. Solid axles on coil springs is the prize, first prize. End of story. So if I was going to go the troop carrier route, as I've just described, I'd have to change the back suspension. I'd have to put in coil springs. And that's not, there are a couple of places in Australia doing it. One of them I just don't like. I'm not going to give the details. I don't like it, and I wouldn't fit it to my car. And so therefore it might be it might have to need some smart engineering to actually do something new, to do something better than is already done. No easy task. Far easier, you might say, and I'm thinking to myself, well, if money is no object, why are you worrying about that if money is no object? If money was truly no object, would you go troop carrier? Because you're talking about the unlimited potential of other chassis that could be converted into a van. After all, if you're changing the body, well, you're changing the body. Why do you have to start with a van? Maybe end with a van and start with a chassis that already has coil springs and solid axles. But here's the problem. What is there? There's the Ineos Grenadier and the Mercedes Unimog. Now, Unimog is not available in Australia. If I was building it for Australia, it would have to be based on a vehicle that I could purchase in Australia. You can't just buy a vehicle and import it into another country. Not easily, but then again, if money was no object, maybe that's possible. But let's put it this way. What would I do? New G-Wagon, 464 series. It's got independent front suspension. They've done away with the solid axle on the non-military versions. So if you want a solid axle on a new Geländewagen, sorry, no longer available, unless you're a military customer. I like that military thing, but I can't have it. So what else? Ineos Grenadier. The Ineos Grenadier definitely has potential. It definitely has potential, but it also requires, I mean, if I took a Ineos Grenadier and converted it, it wouldn't be better than my troop carrier. It might have a better ride, but would it be better in terms of a live out of camper vehicle? Remember, the point of my troop carrier is that it is so fast to set up camp. It is so quick. It's so hassle-free. Because my primary objective when I'm traveling is to film and shoot. So I'm first one up in the morning filming, and I'll grab a quick bite to eat. I won't spend a lot of time cooking because I'm spending my time filming and documenting the trip. That's why I need a vehicle that is really easy to pack up and really easy to put away. And this is really important, somewhere where I can climb into and work. Even if the work is downloading footage, which I've done many, many times all over the world in the back of a station wagon and put my computer on the back seat. I've done it. It's off. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. But I may do. And it's okay. I can do that. But for my own vehicle, I don't want to make do. I want it perfect. Remember, we're talking about money is no object. So what would I build it on? Land Cruiser 300. Okay, so what's good about the Land Cruiser 300 or 200? Okay, 200 no longer available, so say 300 if we're building new. It has independent front suspension. Yeah, I have to deal with that. Maybe I have to deal with that, is what I'm saying, because I've got a Grenadier. What else is there? With coil, springs and solid axles. Nothing else available. It's the last one. Even the G-Wagon's gone independent. So would I buy a G-Wagon or would I buy an Ineos Grenadier? I'll buy a G-Wagon. No question about it. In a heartbeat. Even though it's got independent front suspension on the 464 series. I think I'd buy a G-Wagon. Because the Ineos is tried and not tried and tested like the G-Wagon. And I love the G. I have a love affair with G-Wagons. Okay. And that plays a big part in this. So there is an emotional side of this as well. Would I buy a Toyota? Well, Land Cruiser 300 will give me the comfort that I will want, that I'm not getting from a Troopy and can never. I mean, I've worked a lot on my troop carrier to get it pretty comfortable. It's not nearly as comfortable it's not as comfortable as Ineos Grenadier. So no, I'm not going to get it as comfortable. But live out of camper vehicle, it's better than both of them, by far, unless they were converted. And we all have our compromises. My compromise is I primarily need a vehicle that I can get the places I want to get and use it as a filming vehicle. Therefore, it has to be fast, quick, easy to set up camp and break up camp, etc. But here, if we're talking about ride, we're talking about suspension. If you're going independent front suspension, you must have coil springs and a solid axle on the back, not leaf springs. The reason why all of these vehicles that have mediocre on-road performance, ride quality, all of them share one thing in common. They have leaf springs at the back. Leaf springs are lousy for ride comfort. They're bad at it. You get so much vibration getting transmitted through the cab, through the seating, noise vibration, as well as physical road and wheel vibration. The unsprung weight hanging on an enormous piece of steel and bolted to the car with a little bit of flex in it and some rubber bushes doesn't cut it. Whereas with a coil on a solid axle, it has the ability to move without friction or very little friction. The difference is massive. So a troop carrier with a coil conversion has the potential to be it's not going to be as comfortable as a troop carrier, as a Grenadier or a Land Cruiser 300 or a G-Wagon 464, but it's a big step towards it, and you've still got the camper type van camper potential of a Troopy, but with the comfort or close to the comfort of those other vehicles. I would rather just say, okay, the Troopy's not on the cards, let's find something else. Ineos Grenadier. Could it be converted? The G-Wagon and the Grenadier have one thing in common that is a big disadvantage, and that is they have small fuel tanks. And whereas the troop carrier has huge fuel tanks. I don't even need to do anything with the troop carrier. Anybody fitting an auxiliary tank to a troop carrier to add the range really is, why? The range is already excellent. Chuck in a jerry can for those few times where you might need that extra bit of range, which is what I did on the Canning. I'm not going to tell you if I need it or not, because that would be a spoiler. Okay, so what would I take? The Land Cruiser 300 I like because reliability, Toyota backup, Toyota parts services, can't really deny it's very good. And the stories I'm hearing about the Land Cruiser 300 is very impressive. Okay, generally speaking, very impressive. Doesn't have the drop-down tailgate anymore, and it has some other things that are annoying to people, but it's a good platform. Grenadier, massive unknown factor. I'm not going to spoil what we did on the Canning stock route, but what happened, and the vehicles, all of them, took a hammering. It was very tough. You'll be able to watch and see what we actually had to do with the individual vehicles. And I think about the Ineos Grenadier on that track, and I have a massive question mark. It could have sailed through without the slightest bit of problems. Or it could have had some unexpected problems that even the makers right now don't know about because they haven't tested it in exactly that environment. Our vehicles were tested in an environment that I wasn't even that used to. I'd experienced it before, but not with that intensity day after day after day after day. And you'll have to watch the shows to get the full picture. But it might have just walked it. I doubt very, very much, though, if it wouldn't have actually made the full distance without major mechanical failure. I doubt it. And I think that if we had had a few problems, we probably would have been able to sort them. Even though it's a new design, untested, and really kind of a little bit of an experiment at this early stage. Garlandwagen I can't get, so what is there? If I want solid axles, Ineos Grenadier. If I can live with independent front suspension, Land Cruiser 300. Can I convert it to the kind of interior camper type thing that I've got with a troop carrier? If money was no object, probably. Which one would I choose, Land Cruiser or Ineos? It would almost certainly be an Ineos Grenadier. But right now I'm in love with my troop carrier. So would I actually buy one, and am I going to buy one? The answer is no. Because I don't believe that the improvements made to a Grenadier will match or exceed the troop carrier that I'm driving this very moment. Now, if I did this, what would be its weakness? What are its weaknesses? Turning radius. The turning radius of a 70 series Land Cruiser is very poor. And now you're making it longer and you're making it poorer still. And one of the worst parts about the Dream Tourer, which was the 79 extended 300mm wheelbase, the turning radius was really bad. Probably similar to a Unimog, something that big. Is that a big deal? For touring like this? No. Not occasionally. It's not a deal breaker. Driving it as an everyday driver, it's a deal breaker. In town, that vehicle was cumbersome to drive, and you avoid parking lots, because I was in a parking, more than once I got into a parking lot where I really struggled, even with a reverse camera, to get out. I struggled. It just doesn't turn well. The other disadvantages, most of them, of the troop carrier would be corrected by replacing the back axle, an upgrade, a GVM upgrade, which would make sure that that we would have sufficient payload for range. What I've got behind me here is I've got a range of 180 litres in the standard tanks, plus an extra 20 in a jerry can. It's long enough for most stuff. It really is long enough for most stuff. I wouldn't need to increase that. I've got 110 litres of water. For most trips, it's sufficient. Wouldn't need to increase that. What I would do, though, is completely remodel and re-look at the bedding and sleeping arrangement. That would be a very interesting modification. I would not use a standard product. I would build something from scratch. It would be based on these lines. It would have the similar concepts to this, but it wouldn't be like this. No, it would not be like this. It would be a pop-up. It would be the pop-up. Some of you are familiar with these Land Cruiser pop-up products. Have asked about the Australian-made Cruisinator, which is a pop-up. The Cruisinator, it's really nice. Why didn't I go for one? It is so ugly. It is so ugly, I just said, no, I don't want it. Because I'm sorry, it's got to look good too. The Cruisinator is really interesting, but it looks like a Brits rental. And that, for me, kills it stone dead, because it's not just about how something performs, it's also about how it feels. It's how it feels, and its appearance is part of that. Well, I think so anyway. So that's my answer to you. If money was no object and I could do whatever I wanted to, that's what I would do. I would do something amazing. It would be the troop carrier to end all troop carriers. And it would not be so, it's gotta be practical. This looks good. Do you agree with me when this looks good? This Troopy I think it looks fabulous. But you know something? It is so practical. It is so nice to live with. The looks is a byproduct. That's the fun. Getting it to look right is the fun part about building these vehicles. But to make them super practical and worthy of the trip that I'm on right now, that you go out for 20 days camping in the bush and driving over rough terrain and a dune that I'm about to go up, second gear, and ease up at the top. There you go. Worthy of this kind of travel, and that at the end of the trip you're not exhausted by having to spend all your time breaking up and setting up camp and breaking up camp. It's quick and easy, and you're carrying what you need for an amazing trip like this. And the trip is not necessarily about the trip, but about the other things that you love to do, the fishing or the hunting or the bird watching, or in my case the videography and filmmaking and telling the story of the trip. That's my thing. It's eminently practical. And so, yeah, guys, I'm sorry. It would be a troop carrier again. I have one last thing to say, and that is thank you so much for watching.